Hello, good morning, good afternoon to our audience joining us from various time zones. I'm Raymond Karam, the Chief Program and Development Officer here at AGSIW. Thank you for making the time to join us today as we continue our efforts to cover and analyze the challenges posed by climate change in the Gulf region and the efforts to increase climate adaptation capabilities and limit greenhouse gas emissions. Today, we're focusing a bit more on the UAE's climate-related initiatives, and to help us do that, we're delighted to be hosting Her Excellency Aisha Al Abdooli, the Acting Assistant Undersecretary for Green Development and Climate Change for the UAE's Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. Her Excellency has over 15 years of experience in fields including green development, sustainable development, and the green economy, in addition to expertise in developing policies related to air quality, climate change adaptation, and waste and chemical management. In her current role, she is responsible for developing national policies for the transformation to a green economy. Moderating this session today is Ambassador Douglas Silliman, the president of the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. He previously served as U.S. Ambassador to Iraq from 2016 to 2019 and U.S. Ambassador to Kuwait from 2014 to 2016. He also served as a senior advisor in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs in the U.S. State Department, among other distinguished posts. And with that, Ambassador Silliman, over to you.
Raymond, thank you very much for the introduction. And Excellency, thank you very much for being with us today to tell us a little bit more about climate change and the environment and what the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment does in the UAE. I'd like to open our discussion with a very general question. So in your view and in the view of the government of the United Arab Emirates, what are the key climate and environmental challenges facing the UAE and facing the region?
Well, first of all, let me start with saying good morning to our audience at the States and good afternoon to the audience in the different time zones. It's really a pleasure to be with you here today, and thanks for hosting us in this dialogue to highlight the efforts that UAE is putting toward the to face the environmental challenges that we are already having. So as you know, that UAE has a hot and arid desert climate, and that is characterized by water scarcity and limited arable land, which has a negative impact on both agriculture and food security. So to mitigate that challenge, we are investing heavily in agricultural R&D, and we seek to leverage the state-of-art technologies and innovative cultivation methods, including vertical farming, hydroponic, organic farming, and controlled environment agriculture to boost local agricultural production while enhancing the quality and variety of homegrown produce. So our government is committed actually to drive the innovation in agriculture. And in 2019, Abu Dhabi Investment Office introduced a program to develop agricultural technologies, and that is valued around $272 million US. So an important area of agri-tech that has been relevant to our country and to our region is vertical farming. And that is actually provides an ideal solution to the challenges that UAE faces. At the recent Leaders Summit on Climate in Washington in April 2021, UAE and the United States had announced a new joint initiative, which is the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate. And that initiative is aiming to drive the agricultural innovation and the R&D around the world. And this is actually reinforcing UAE's pioneering position in global climate action. And that initiative will go a long way in attracting investment to agricultural R&D. And that will, in turn, fast-track the development and the deployment of cutting-edge solutions. So other than that, we have other environmental challenges facing our country, which are related to the impacts of climate change that range from increasing temperature and humidity with longer hot and humid season to uneven distribution of rainfall and increase of frequency and the scale of extreme weather events, such as the storms and the flash floods. So one of the major threats posed by climate change to our country is rising the sea level, because if as if you know, that UAE has nearly 1,300 kilometers of coastlines, and approximately 85% of the population and over 90% of the infrastructure are located in low-lying coastal areas. So these are like the major challenges that we are facing, Ambassador Douglas.
Undersecretary, thank you very much for that, for the discussion of food security, rising temperatures and extreme storms, and particularly rising sea level, because I know just simply looking at Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Sharjah, so much of the development is on the low plains near the Gulf.
Yeah.
What are your priorities in trying to address these? Again, and maybe I should ask one more. You talked about food security and development in low-lying areas. How are you tackling particularly this last one? Are you changing the way in which property is developed, the way in which land is allocated for different types of development in the future? Are there plans to move population or infrastructure away from the coast and further inland? And how are you prioritizing? Obviously, food security is a very high priority, but how are you prioritizing what seems to me to be a very serious issue of slowly rising sea levels and its impact on your ability to support your infrastructure and population?
Well, in order to answer these important questions, let me structure my answer in like several components or several layers. So to start with, we had already established in 2016 the UAE Council for Climate Change and Environment. And that council is actually mandated to develop and execute plans to achieve the country's environmental objectives, build synergies with the private sector, and lead scientific research. So in the fields that are related to the challenges that we had already addressed. So this council is actually a very important platform because it gathers both federal level entities with, like public and governmental entities, with private sector entities, with academia, the representatives from academic as well, or academia. So it's a very, good mix of the high level and decision makers to sit together and discuss all of those environmental issues and environmental challenges to chart our path forward in climate change mitigation and adaptation. We launched our long-term national climate change plan, which is from 2017 up to 2050. And that plan is actually a national and a comprehensive framework that aims to address the causes and the impacts of climate change and drive the transition to climate resilient, green economy, and enhancing the quality of life. So within that plan, we are implementing the National Climate Change Adaptation Program that seeks to strengthen our climate resilience as part And as part of that program, risks across four sectors, which are the energy, the infrastructure, the health, and the environment, have been assessed. And sectoral adaptation action plans are being actually developed according to the outcomes from that assessment. So we recognize the need for countries of this region to work together to enhance the understanding of regional climate impacts and develop evidence-based adaptation plan. So we have recently established UAE Climate Change Research Network, and that platform brings together a group of committed scientists and researchers to advance climate data collection and policy relevant research on climate change impacts and adaptation that will help define an informed climate agenda for the country. So this year we had issued as well a state of the state of a climate in UAE, and that report, it's very important because it provides an overview of historical and projected climate changes and their potential impacts, not only on UAE, but as well on wider Arabian Gulf region. The annual publication of this report will identify and it will give us, more knowledge about the gaps, and it will offer guidance to further locally relevant climate research. So we acknowledge actually the key role of the young generation in the environmental sustainability movement. So that's why we had launched Emirates Youth Climate Strategy that aims to develop environmental leadership skills among young people and engage them in solving our most pressing environmental concern. So these are, some of the actions that we are taking to actually address the challenges from different perspectives, from a government perspective, from private sector perspective, from academia and research, and also from the youth perspective.
Now, how are some of these initiatives actually being implemented on the ground? Are there plans that have come out of your National Climate Change Adaptation Committee that have looked at development, looked at public education programs for youth? I mean, there are so many aspects to preparing a country and its population to deal with climate change. What are the most pragmatic things that have happened based on these initiatives? And what have you got, if you will, that you are hoping to roll out in the coming couple of years in terms of actual changes on the ground? The results, I mean, you talked about vertical agriculture and and ideas for increasing food security. Maybe I should ask more specifically about energy, because the UAE is one of the largest producers in the world of oil, of petrochemicals. Its energy system has for long been based on hydrocarbon-produced energy. So how is the UAE making this transition in your own energy system? You said that you're seeking the sustainability and continued access to energy for the population. How do you plan to move away from the use of fossil fuels for producing electricity, driving cars, doing desalination of water, and all the very energy-intensive things that the UAE population requires?
Well, that is really a very important area to cover in our dialogue today, Ambassador Douglas, because as you stated, that UAE is a major fossil fuel producer. So the oil and gas sector is a significant contributor to our economy in our country, and it will continue to play its role during the ongoing transition to renewable energy in line with the UAE Energy Strategy 2050. So our current focus is on reducing the sector's carbon emissions. So our oil and gas sector has been at the global forefront of adopting climate-friendly industry practices. For instance, if you allow me to give a few examples about that,
Please.
Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, which is called ADNOC, or it's abbreviated as ADNOC, had committed already to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2030. The move will strengthen its position as one of the least carbon-intensive oil and gas producers in the world. The company has also developed the region's first commercial-scale carbon capture, utilization, and storage network. And that aims actually to maximize the value of the natural resources through the enhanced oil recovery. The project's current installed capacity is around 800,000 tons per year, and which is expected to grow manifold in the coming years. Having adopted a zero flaring policy in routine operation, UAE oil and gas companies are regional leaders in flaring avoidance design and operation. So the use of optical imagery, infrared capabilities, and vapor recovery system had allowed them to actually monitor and reduce the fugitive emissions across the value chain. So the whole value chain is being controlled, and they continue to build on these achievements. UAE is actively collaborates with other fossil fuel exporting countries to exchange knowledge and best practices in the implementation of low carbon technology. And in this particular context, allow me to highlight an example, which is very important to mention, that as a regional leader in climate action, UAE is spearheading the transition to clean energy with a growing renewable capacity. Alhamdulillah, we are lucky to enjoy abundant sunshine for most of the year, and it's only natural that we have turned towards solar power as the energy of the future. Our clean power capacity, including solar and nuclear, is on track to reach 14 gigawatt by 2030. And that is a significant increase from the 125 megawatt in 2015. To date, we have invested over 40 billion US dollars in clean energy projects locally. In the Emirate of Abu Dhabi is about to become a home of the world's largest solar power plant with a capacity of 2 gigawatt. And the winning bid for this project has already broke another world record for the lowest solar power generation cost at 1.35 US cents per kilowatt hour. We are as well developing a 5 gigawatt Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum solar park. And once it's completed, it's expected that it will be the largest single site solar park in the world based on the independent power producer model. Let me add to that also the launch of the first reactor of the 5,600 megawatt Baraka nuclear energy plant, which has established the UAE as the first Arab country to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Once all of the 4 reactors are fully operational, the plant will provide up to 25% of the country's electricity needs and save up to around 20 million tons of carbon emissions every year. And that is equivalent to remove around 3.2 million cars from the road. In addition to all of those, projects, we are as well exploring new low carbon sources of energy, such as clean hydrogen, and that environment friendly fuel can be used in a variety of sectors, such as the transportation and decarbonization of the heavy industries. Just one more thing to add in this regard is like we had recently launched the first solar powered hydrogen electrolysis facility in the region in Dubai. And meanwhile, this year marked the formation of Abu Dhabi Hydrogen Alliance that aims to establish UAE as a capital of and a pioneer in green and blue hydrogen. So that is in a nutshell the different efforts we are putting together to diversify our economy and move from the oil and gas sector to other, diversification of energy sources, whether it's solar, nuclear, or it's in form of a clean hydrogen.
No, thank you very much for that very comprehensive summary of initiatives. And I know that the investment and the vision of the UAE has been very much focused on renewable energy and low carbon production of hydrocarbons. You also mentioned a couple of times that the entire region has the same problems that the UAE has, the same challenges that you face from climate change. So I wanted to ask you about your cooperation with other countries in the region, particularly your other partners in the Gulf Cooperation Council. How do you interact with those countries on climate change issues, and what cooperation has the United Arab Emirates been able to take more regionally and beyond the borders of the UAE?
Well, as you addressed that, GCC countries have similar interests and similar challenges, and the collaboration to address the impacts of climate change on the region is actually a necessity. So our cooperation has resulted in multiple milestone environmental achievements, and it has strengthened the Council's presence as an effective and active entity in international climate and environmental forums. The recent COVID-19 pandemic has added a new importance to alignment of efforts, as well as exchange of experience and expertise. We are currently working together to implement the environmental directions for the GCC countries 2020 and the GCC Green Initiative for Environment and Sustainable Development, and many other important projects. On a wider regional scale, last month, UAE has brought together high-level dignitaries from across the Arab world for the first UAE regional climate dialogue with participation of the United States Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, Mr. John Kerry. And the event had reaffirmed the country's status as a key actor in the global climate dialogue. In that dialogue, the first topic, actually there were like 3 topics that were discussed. and were highlighted. So the first topic was climate change mitigation in the context of the recent announcement of the second nationally determined contribution, NDCs, under the Paris Agreement. The regional delegates reiterated that the window to keep global average temperature rise below 2 degrees is getting narrower, and discussed their country's steps towards achieving this goal. The second topic that was addressed and highlighted in that dialogue was climate change adaptation, with a focus on developing the agricultural sector, strengthening the food security, and adopting nature-based solutions. In this context, the participants highlighted the importance of supporting developing countries with finance and technologies transfer. As many countries of the region are major hydrocarbon producers, so the third topic actually was dedicated to the energy sector, and that include the transition to renewable energy, as well as reducing the carbon footprint of the oil and gas sector. So that event provided us with an ideal opportunity to review our progress in climate action, exchange knowledge and experience with other countries of the region, and identify new areas of collaboration, and as well raise our collective ambition in running up to COP28. The Ministry of Climate Change and Environment and the World of Green Economy Organization are also gearing up to host the MENA Climate Week in collaboration with UNDP, UNEP, and the UN Climate Change and the World Bank Group. And that event actually is set to take place in March 2022 on the sidelines of Expo 2020 Dubai. And it's the first event of its kind in the Middle East and North Africa, which seeks to boost the momentum of climate action in the region and support the transition towards a new model of sustainable development. The forum will actually convene leaders from the government, private sector, civil society from MENA countries to share their perspectives on climate change, explore opportunities for collaboration in addressing this challenge, and following up on the discussion raised during the COP26.
Well, thank you. In fact, you anticipated my next question, which was going to ask, what cooperation are you engaged in beyond the region? We have a very specific question from a member of our audience about international cooperation. And the question is, does the UAE plan to join the Net Zero Producers Forum, which was set up by the United States, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Qatar, and Norway, to further reduce its emissions in the oil and gas sector, or to work with others to get their reductions as well?
We actually received the invitation to form this forum just before the Biden summit on climate change, and we are assessing our joining and our participation in this important forum internally, and we are welcoming the joining or welcoming the establishment of such a forum, and it will be very soon, announced about the UAE joining this forum and complementing the efforts that the other countries are putting in this regard.
Okay. We also have another question from the audience about UAE renewable plans in the context of your 2050 program for decarbonization of the energy. The question says, even in the 2050 plan, the UAE will still use 38% of gas for electricity generation and 12% from imported coal. And the question is, do you hope to be able to reduce the use of fossil fuels below that in your 2050 plan? Will there be reviews that may look at ways to actually reduce that use of hydrocarbon produced electricity?
Sure. So to answer this question, let me just take you back to 2015, when we had submitted our first NDC. In our first NDC, we included a target to increase the share of clean power to 24% of total energy mix by 2021. In December 2020, we submitted our second NDC, and that raises our climate ambition with an enhanced target to reduce the greenhouse gases emission by 23.5% compared to business as usual of the year 2030. And this translates into absolute emission reduction of about 70 million tons. So Our efforts to reduce the emissions include increasing reliance on clean energy, boosting energy efficiency, expanding our capacity for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, conserving the blue carbon ecosystems, promoting sustainable agriculture, and implementing environmental friendly waste management practices. So we are supporting actually our agenda of economic and energy diversification, and we are working on strengthening our response to the threat of climate change in line with our commitment to building better future for all. فalready UAE, as you may know, it's already a global champion for the theme of enabling sustainable development goals through inclusive just energy transition under SDG 7. And in that regard, we have, as part of this role, the country works closely with other champions to drive the clean energy transition at the speed and the scale necessary to implement the SDGs. I hope that I answered the question of the audience in this regard.
And I have two more specific questions about things that you have mentioned also from our audience. The first one from Dr. Robert Mogilnecki, who is a senior resident scholar at the Gulf States Institute. He thanks you for the comments that you made and wondered if you could share development updates about the Dubai Food Tech Valley and related efforts to commercialize food security and sustainable agriculture in the UAE.
Well, that initiative was recently launched in order to promote the research and development and to support the technology transition and sharing of technology in the field of food security and agriculture. So we are working, to have that valley in operation with several, or you can consider it as an incubator for the innovators and for the technology providers in the field of agriculture and in the field of the R&D in agriculture. Very soon you will be, hearing a lot of updates about that valley and the progress that is being made under the umbrella of that initiative.
And Leila Sabil has a specific question asking if you can provide a little more information on the Emirates' plans for development of green and blue hydrogen. Which has been, there's been a lot of publicity on the Saudi efforts, but if you could tell us a bit more about Emirati plans for hydrogen development, that would be very interesting as well.
Well, as I just mentioned just a few minutes ago, that we are already considering the clean hydrogen and, as you say, the green and the blue hydrogen, applications and implementation here in UAE. We had recently launched a very important solar powered hydrogen electrolysis facility in the region. We just opened it here in Dubai, and already there is established a formation of Abu Dhabi Hydrogen Alliance that aims to establish UAE as a capital and as a pioneer in a green and a blue hydrogen, and that will spread ahead the development of the clean hydrogen economy in the country.
So thank you very much for addressing all of those specific questions from the audience. Let me go back to the international cooperation in which the UAE is engaged and broaden this even more to global cooperation under the banner of the United Nations, particularly the Paris Climate Accord. Can you explain to us sort of how the UAE is working with the UN and UN agencies to prepare for COP26 coming up soon, and what you feel your future cooperation with UN on climate might look like?
Well, UAE, as you may know, that it was one of the first countries in the region to sign the Paris Agreement in 2015. And in the same year, we had developed our first NDC that included the target of increasing the share of our clean power to 24% by 2021. As I mentioned, that we had submitted our second NDC to the UNFCCC, and we are working closely with the different regions in the preparation of the COP26, whether it's within the Asian Pacific region that we are part of it, or with also the other countries, including UK as a host for the COP26, in order to ensure that there are, shared initiatives and common initiatives that we will be work together with them. As you may know as well, that already UAE has announced a bid to host the COP28 in Abu Dhabi by 2023, with a focus on building a compelling business case for inclusive climate action. UAE plans to leverage its experience as a regional and a global convener of climate action to mobilize all actors to raise their climate ambitions and achieve the objectives of Paris Agreement. So we are working and putting a lot of efforts in this regard by coordinating with several countries and potential players in this regard.
Thank you for mentioning Abu Dhabi's bid for COP28. I was taken this past week by U.S. climate envoy Kerry's comments in Abu Dhabi that seemed quite enthusiastic toward Emirati sponsorship or hosting of COP28. We also have a question from Maria Malouf. Maybe more specifically, what other issues beyond working with the UN is the UAE undertaking to promote the issue of dealing with climate change around the world? Sultan Al Jaber, the UAE's Minister of State, said that climate diplomacy, like that of U.S. President Joe Biden's Earth Day Summit, reinforces Emirati's partnerships. Can you tell us more about the partnerships with specific countries or specific entities around the world that the UAE is trying to pursue? You've mentioned partnerships in food security with the United States. Where else do you have significant international cooperation partnerships that will push the idea of resilience to climate change forward?
Well, UAE used to be and will continue to be a potential player in in designing and marking the global agenda toward climate change and how to deal with the impact of climate change. So in this regard, we are part of, as you say, we launched together the initiative of the United States for innovative in agriculture for climate change. And we had as well, we are part of several agreements, alliances, and initiatives with other countries. For example, let me mention to you the alliance that we have on clean, which is CCAC, the Clean Air and Climate Change Alliance, and Climate Change Coalition. And that is, a very important coalition for us because we work together with the other countries to exchange the knowledge and expertise in tackling the climate change and the air quality aspects at the same time, since the air quality is very much linked to the climate change and the impact of the climate change. Another, initiatives or agreements or alliances that we are part of is an alliance for green development on the Belt and Road that has been initiated by the Chinese government back in, I think, 2017 or 2018. So we are part of that alliance as well, and we are working together with the other counterparts in this region to boost the actions toward having a resilience to the climate change impacts and the issues that we are facing together.
Thank you very much. I've got three questions related to the longer-term composition of production of energy and electricity in the UAE, all very similar, really talking about the future composition of Emirati energy. Mari Lomi asks whether or not the Emirates are contemplating announcing before COP26 that you hope for a net zero greenhouse gas emission before COP26, or if that is what you're moving toward 2050. And other questions ask essentially, can you be more specific about the mix of energy in your plan going forward to 2050? Your earlier answer talked a lot about carbon capture, utilization, and storage to reduce carbon emissions. Could you talk a little bit about plans to reduce the use of hydrocarbons as a base of energy for the UAE, in addition to a real focus on carbon sequestration?
Well, coming to the first point of going or adopting a net zero strategy, that has been, we are actually studying this project, and we are studying it in details. We didn't announce anything yet about it, but if it will be announced, then, of course, you will be knowing about it. But still, this subject is under consideration and under studying and assessment, because as you know, that the whole world is going toward adopting a net zero strategy and adopting carbon neutrality. But still, that is under consideration and under assessment by our government. And if there will be any decision about it, then it will be announced by the relevant official government. The second question, which is it's related to the diversification of the energy, as I mentioned, that we are trying to increase the reliance on clean energy and boosting the energy efficiency and expanding the capacity of the carbon capture, utilization, and the storage. So that is the most of the energy mix is focusing about.
Okay. I have a question from Aisha Al Abdooli, who is a non-resident fellow with us at AGSIW and one of our experts on climate change. She would like to learn from you a little more information on the recent regional climate dialogue that was held 2 months ago, and the accomplishments that you think came out of that regional climate dialogue.
Well, as I just mentioned earlier in my conversation, that when we host that the regional climate dialogue with the participation of U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, Mr. John Kerry, we had already hosted a number of Arab countries and GCC countries to participate in that dialogue. So the dialogue had already focused or had discussed 3 main topics. The first topic was climate change mitigation, in the context of the recent announcement of the second NDCs under Paris Agreement. And in that particular topic, the regional delegates reiterated that the window to keep the global average temperature below 2 degrees is getting narrower, and we had discussed the country's steps toward achieving the goal. The second topic that was discussed in this dialogue was climate change adaptation, with a focus on developing the agricultural sector and strengthening the food security and adapting the nature-based solution. And in that context, we highlighted the importance of supporting developing countries with finance and technological transfer. And the third topic was related to energy sector, and that include the transition to renewable energy, as well as reducing the carbon footprint of the oil and gas sector. So that event, really, the dialogue provided us with an ideal opportunity to review the progress in climate action, exchange knowledge and experience with other countries, and also identify the new areas of collaboration that we need to work on and to raise our collective ambition in running up to COP26.
You just mentioned this regional discussion of climate change adaptation. One of the strategies that I have seen talked about in other countries in the Gulf is increasing the efficiency of the use of energy through retrofitting buildings and residences, trying to provide public transportation that is green or done through renewable energy. What are some of the key climate change adaptation steps that the UAE envisions in its plan going forward to 2050?
Well, when we conducted our national UAE adaptation program, we had conducted an assessment of 4 main priorities. And those priorities or those sector was the health sector, the impact of climate change on the health sector, the impact of climate change on infrastructure, the impact of climate change on environment, and finally, the impact of climate change on energy sector. And in every particular sector, we had identified and assessed the impact on that particular sector, how it will, react, or what actions needs to be taken in order to adapt that sector to the impact of a climate change. In addition to that, we are currently working on assessing the impact of climate change as well on the insurance sector in order to make sure that the insurance sector, the financial sector is fully aware about the different, reactions or impacts that could yield from the climate change, and that they have to take it in consideration and when they are developing their insurance plans.
Thank you very much. You earlier mentioned that the coronavirus pandemic has had an impact on the way that the countries of the GCC cooperate. Maybe a question is, what has been the impact of coronavirus on your efforts to adapt the UAE to climate change, to implement your policies, and on regional cooperation as well?
Well, in order to answer this question, let's go back to review the measures that had already been taken by most of the countries, how those measures and how those actions have slowing down the spread of the coronavirus that took an unexpected turn when large cities recorded like a 50% reduction in air pollution, biodiversity increase, and animals reclaim territories. So one of the trends that have a positive impact on environment and have been reinforced due to the pandemic is the rise of remote meetings, as what we are doing right now. So conducting meetings and attending conferences virtually is actually an effective way to reduce the travel carbon footprint that has resulted in a considerable improvement of air quality during the lockdown. In addition to that, the economic instability we have experienced since the beginning of the pandemic has changed the consumption behaviors. People have learned that they can live without a lot of things that they used to consider important, and that supports the responsible consumption and a significant step in addressing the waste problem. So, although these behaviors were originally not driven by the desire to be eco-friendly, we believe that once people see their environmental benefits, they will refrain from going back to their old ways. Furthermore, the outbreak put in motion a level of global coordination that has not been witnessed before, whether from governments or from business or society. So this has created a new baseline for what we can achieve when we work together. So the pandemic has also shown us that early action is crucial, and any delay in the response can result in tragic outcomes. Another valuable lesson is that no country, regardless of its political and financial strength, is immune to global challenges. So while the economic slowdown caused by the pandemic has put pressure on resources and institutions across the world, particularly in developing countries, it has also opened opportunities to expand and accelerate climate action. Needless to say, containing the COVID-19 outbreak is a policy priority at the moment. But as countries work to recover from the crisis, there is a resounding call for building back better and charting a more sustainable, equitable, and green economic pathway.
I'm very interested in two aspects of your answer. The first of which struck me, you said that people have discovered during the pandemic that there are things they thought were necessary before the pandemic, which may no longer be necessary. Where have you seen that? What kinds of things? Is it in the food they consume? Is it in the consumer products that they consume? Is it travel, new automobiles? What kinds of things have people decided that they may no longer need that will also help the environment and help combat climate change?
Well, to summarize my answer, I would say all of the above. All of what you had already mentioned had been already impacted by us as a people. We as a human being, we like to consume a lot, and sometimes, although there are several awareness initiatives and awareness practices and efforts to reduce our consumption, but still we like to consume. But when the pandemic came, we found ourselves that we need to actually be conservative in our consumption and to reduce our consumption as much as we can in order to, to be secure and to be safe. So I believe that that has a positive impact on our behavior as a consumer, and I hope that this will continue.
The second aspect that you mentioned is transportation and to some extent tourism. Before the pandemic, the UAE was very much developing the UAE both as a tourism destination and as a transit hub through two major international airlines, both Etihad and Emirates. How do you think the pandemic and or climate change adaptation is going to affect the UAE as a tourism destination and the business models of both Etihad and Emirates and probably Qatar Airlines as well, which is the third really big airline in the Southern Gulf region? How do you see that affecting transportation? And how does your ministry work with the two major airlines on trying to find ways to be more green as you pursue tourism and transportation as economic sectors?
Well, I would say that the whole world has been already impacted by the pandemic, and the all vital sectors, whether there are in transportation sector or energy sector or any other sector, tourism or any other sector, had already impacted from the pandemic that had hit the whole world and that we did not expect it at all. So there was for sure a severe impact on all of the sectors, but the good thing that we see that they were able to recover very quickly from the pandemic impact, and they started to diversify the efforts they are putting in being more sustainable. So we are coordinating closely with Emirates and Etihad Airlines, and we know that they are having a great and very big and potential efforts and projects in making their operations more greener, sustainable, and environmental friendly, whether it's at the operation side at the airports, like the land operations, or the other kind of operations and practices. So they are having, several sustainable initiatives in place related to waste management, related to the use of energy efficiency system, related also to test the green or the green fuel, and having that green fuel in their jet system as well. So there are a lot of effort that had been made by those two companies in making their operations to be more sustainable.
And I know that the UAE is trying very hard to be a world leader in adaptations and getting out the message of climate change. I was interested in something that you said in cooperation with Expo 2022 in Dubai, and in how are you engaging the idea of climate sustainability with the other themes, which are much more commercial and developmental around Expo 2020, and how will that push forward the idea of climate adaptation, renewable energy, carbon sequestration? Are you using that upcoming important world conference as a platform, and how can you use it more, perhaps?
Well, I would say that one of the three themes or the three pillars of Expo Dubai is actually sustainability. And the whole thing of sustainability, or the whole aspects of sustainability, is already inherited in the Expo design and its, the establishment of that place. I would really, like to invite all of you to visit that place to see how sustainable it is. Even, like the building of the Expo itself is being done in a way that the whole buildings will stay to be, converted to other uses. So it will not be just a kind of like, we just build it for the Expo and then we need to remove it. No, it's actually becoming a whole city and a whole holistic and a comprehensive city with all of the, components needed for city development will be there, and it will actually stay as a kind of a legacy for the next generations. So already the sustainability is in the heart of Expo development, of Expo establishment, and of promotion of the whole idea of Expo. I would say that in this exceptional times, if we want to derive a holistic, sustainable development, we must revisit our priorities. So we need to shift our focus to safeguard the future of the mankind through supporting scientific research and making strategic sectors like the agriculture, education, health, and technology to be more resilient and adaptive to changes.
I have a question from Ahmed Surab. Following up on something I asked a little bit earlier, he would like to know that since so much of UAE's infrastructure lies on the coastlines, what more specifically are some of the mitigation strategies that are being utilized to protect this preponderance of Emirati infrastructure?
Well, we tackled that in the assessment that we conducted to the infrastructure sector when we had developed our climate change adaptation program. And in that particular assessment, we found out what are the major, actions that needs to be taken in order to ensure that that infrastructure sector is adapted and is resilient to the climate change and the climate change impact. If you want to have more information about that, Mr. Ahmed can visit our website where we published already the reports of the assessment for the infrastructure sector and the actions and the recommendations that are in place or that had been already resulted from that report.
Thank you. If I might sort of ask you maybe a more personal question. You have a lot of responsibility at the ministry. Your career has been spent on climate change mitigation. To put it simply, what keeps you awake at night? What are the things that you are most worried about on climate change, on the environment, that you want to make sure that you do more about, that you want to make sure that your ministry addresses?
Well, do you want to have or do you want to hear one thing or many? Because I have a list of things that makes me really worry during the night. But to maybe to summarize and to have a focus, I would say that the future of the well-being of the coming generation, that really what makes me worrying at night, especially that recently I have two daughters, so I'm really thinking of this new generation, the coming generation, how they will be, what their future will be look like. Alhamdulillah that we've been through a lot of prosperity during the last years for our ages. But when it comes to the coming generation, it makes me feel worrying about their future. So I think this extends beyond UAE or Gulf region. And when we talk about saving the planet, fostering the peace, creating prosperity, enhancing partnership, and nourishing our people, that must be a priority that is given to the whole world. It's not only for UAE or for the Gulf region. So I believe that UAE commitment toward the sustainable development is steadfast as demonstrated in our past achievement and contribution nationally and internationally. So we are committed to do more and for a better future, and we hope that it will be really a better future for our kids and for the new generations.
Well, that's again, as a parent as well, what concerns me the most is the health and the future of my children. You mentioned earlier that the ministry wants to reach out to the youth of the Emirates to educate them, to help them deal with the issues, the challenges of climate change. What specifically do you plan to do? What kinds of education, public outreach programs? When do you begin in schools in the Emirates discussion of climate change and mitigation and different methods of generating energy? How are you approaching educating the next generation of Emiratis about what they need to deal with these challenges and how they might help their children overcome it even more in the future?
Well, first of all, we had already developed a youth climate strategy that is being directed to the youth generation in order to involve them in the aspects of climate change and the environmental challenges. We are conducting several youth circles with the several youth categories, to involve them in making the decision. So whenever we are developing a strategy or a policy, there will be a time dedicated for, or a time slot dedicated in that strategy development dedicated to the youth engagement. So we will bring the youth either virtually or physically, and we introduce to them the policy or the strategy that we want to develop, and we ask them on their ideas, on their recommendations on how to develop that strategy, how to develop that policy. So that is like one aspect we are working on. The other aspect is actually modifying and enhancing the curriculums at the schools, at the colleges and the universities to ensure that there will be the climate change and environmental challenges, priorities are already embedded in those curriculums from the beginning. So you will see the kids from the KG or from the grade 1 or grade 2, they will start talking about, different aspects related to environment up to grade 12 and up to the college and the university time. So that has been very much, coordinated with the Ministry of Education in order to ensure that there will be embedding the most important, challenges or environmental challenges that we are working on, and they are aware of it.
Thank you very much for that answer. We are nearly out of time for our discussion. Are there any final comments that you would like to make to our audience?
Well, I would say that it was a real pleasure to be with all of you today in this important dialogue. And I'm really happy that we are able to conduct such dialogues, by staying at our houses and at our homes without, needing to transport from a place to another and increasing our footprint or our carbon footprint. I think that we have a lot of things to do. And what we learned from the pandemic, that the much that we are together, the much that we can achieve. So that is really very important. The collaboration, coordination, and cooperation between the different groups, between the different countries, it's very much needed, and it's a necessity in order to achieve our targets.
Your Excellency, Aisha Al Abdooli, thank you very much for being with us. For our audience, Her Excellency has given us a virtual encyclopedia of the Emirates' efforts to address climate change and to educate its population and cooperate. We have recorded this session. It will be available tomorrow for you to watch again, take additional notes, send to your friends on Twitter or other social media for anybody who is interested in the very extensive efforts that the Emirates are actually undertaking. So to do that tomorrow, go to our website, www.agsiw.org, and you can run through this again, run it forward and backward, and take more detailed notes on the steps that the Emirates are taking. Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure having you with us today. And for our audience in the United States, in the Middle East, and elsewhere in the world, thank you very much for watching us, and we hope to have you back soon for another of our programs. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.